Hey there, everybody. Welcome to our What We Do in the Shadows Season 5, Episode 9 reaction and review. It is time to spend a weekend at Morgan Manor.
I was so excited when I saw the synopsis for this. It's like this mysterious, illustrious, grand vampire that has these exclusive parties that are so exclusive, nobody's there except her. I was just like, who are they going to bring in to play this vampire? And as it turns out, it's the guide.
What a. This episode was very funny and also very, very weird. Like, there was a lot of interesting stuff that happened. I do like that there are just sort of like these humans just running around for the entirety of this. Like, can you imagine being an extra on this episode? You're just supposed to like run around in the background, like potentially being hunted by Nandor and some of these other people who are slowly disappearing over the course of the night.
This was a really, really packed episode. I mean, we got lots of the guide, how she's feeling about stuff, the huge, reveal from Guillermo to Nandor being like, I did this thing, his reaction to it all, which I think we expected to be as angry as he was about it.
Yeah.
But we're gonna get into all of that.
Yeah. Now, before we do go forward here, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We are very, very close to 65,000 subscribers. We are very grateful to everyone who has subscribed to the channel. It helps us so much. And we've been doing this a really long time. So milestones like this are really significant to us. So thank you guys so much for your support.
Absolutely. And there's going to be more What We Do in the Shadows coming up. We're going to have our finale review, shortly after
Yeah.
after this. And
Yeah.
I mean, it is coming back for season 6 and we will be as well. So hit that
Yes.
subscribe button.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about the guide because she's had some stuff to do this season, but not enough. Like when the whole Naja has a hex came up, and basically the guide is like, you know how you fix this? You just need to be nice to people and have friends. I was like, okay, well, obviously the guide is behind this because she's been saying, she really wants to be part of this group. She really likes everybody. She's been
Yeah.
around a long time. And it's really hard to break into a group of vampires that are already together. And so the Hex story started out pretty decently because I think we all knew that the guide was behind it, but it kind of like fizzled out throughout the season. But the payoff now was really good.
Yeah. In the end, it makes some element of sense that the guide is going to do something like this because she's so desperate for attention to be a part of something. I think what she doesn't realize, this is just a classic saying, it's probably even more true with immortal vampires. Nobody likes to try hard, the guide. You're trying too hard. You're doing too much. You know what would probably make them want you in the group? Acting like you don't care if you are in the group. Play a little hard to get. Like, try to find some sort of way to make them intrigued about you. Like, your name is the guide. Like, you are still very mysterious. You can lean more into that, and instead you concoct this whole revenge plot where you get them all out there to Morgan Manor where there are no special guest vampires waiting for all of it. You reveal to Naja that the whole hex thing was a lie.
Yeah. How many people out there, leave it in the comments, knew that the whole thing with Morgan Manor was the guide? At what point did you figure it out? Because for me, the moment that I figured it out was when the actual hostess wasn't there. And as soon as they walked in and they're like, oh, there's nobody here. Oh, there's a tape. And the tape is basically like, all 6 of you need to be friends and you all need to be together. I was like, okay, this is the hex all over again, which I already suspected was the guide. And now they have to come together and work together and be a family of vampires and be friends. I'm like, okay, so she's behind all of this.
You're a little more on the ball than I was. I didn't figure it out until something happened to Naja and Naja fell. And then at that point I was just like, why didn't anything happen to the guide? Because the guide was in the scene. And I was like, okay, So clearly, this is all some sort of stunt that's being done over time, and she's organized it.
One of the things that I was really hoping for was we had this like amazing fencing scene going on with your guy Laszlo,
Uh,
which was the first person to get captured
yeah.
in this manner where, he's fencing with just, a dummy. And then she comes in, she's like, hey, I can fence with you. I'm really good at this. No, no, I'd rather not with you. I'll just continue to practice on the dummy. And then all of a sudden, all these different people show up that are all fencers. I was waiting for the reveal that it was all the wraiths. That
Uh,
somewhere along the line, when they were all in the cages, that it was like, well, who are all these fencers? Who are they? Like, are they people? Are they other vampires? I was waiting for them to all like, pull off the hoods and be like, it's us.
that would have been great. No,
Yeah.
that would no. I did love the Laszlo fight scene in general. I'm very happy that he had more to do in this episode beyond just saying yes, yes, very good, thank you.
Yeah.
And okay, the Laszlo we all know and love is back, but then also trapped alongside all of our other vampires.
Yeah, and that was the thing too, is when the guide, it was more confirmed for me when the guide's like, "Oh, let's go up to the tower." I'm like, she's very familiar with this place for
Yeah,
someone who's never been there before.
yeah, it's like unless you're studying a map of the place before you go there, which really only seems to happen on like vacation movies where like the dad is like, I saw in page 3 of the guide here, Johnny, that we need to go to the parlor now. It's okay. She was very well aware of a lot of the surroundings. She had more to gain out of this trip than anyone. Like, my prediction for this episode, I'll just say, was way off. Because I thought that they were all going to be going here because this legendary vampire was somebody who was going to know how to cure Guillermo.
Yes, I thought that as well. I was totally snowed on that. I
Yeah,
absolutely thought that this legendary vampire was going to have some sort of information that was going to cure Guillermo or help him turn all the way or something they were going to be the person to help. And yeah, they weren't even in the episode at all.
no, they weren't. But instead, we did get the big confirmation, and how the show did it was pretty effective in the sense that at this point, Nandor and the other vampires are all trapped, and the guide is there. And of course, the guide has a big mouth, and she kind of gets the ball rolling. And Guillermo is just like, okay, at this point, I have to say something. Granted, this is about as safe of a way as Guillermo can say it. He's kind of lucky that Nandor was trapped because he couldn't
Yeah.
do anything to him.
It was a pretty honest conversation between the two of them as well. I
Yeah,
mean, Nandor was really hurt and he
yeah,
said that he was, and he was basically like, if you really wanted to be turned, I would have done it for you. And Guillermo called that out, was
yeah.
like, are you kidding me? Like, it's been 13 years. I've asked you numerous times to turn me, and you just kept saying, it's not the time, it's not the time, it's not the time. It was never going to be the time. And while, yeah, he went about it the wrong way and he doesn't feel good about it, at the same time, Guillermo's like, you were never going to fulfill your promise to me. You just kept saying you were going to fulfill your promise to me. And now we're here. And yeah, I did this thing and I regret it because I know that I betrayed you, but like I'm here now.
Of course, Nandor is really angry about all this. He's doing his whole "I'm going to kill you" while he is trapped and he can't get out of his little pen. But ultimately, he can be really mad at Guillermo, but he also, and maybe he is, he's got to be mad at himself because he's the reason why all this happened. And I know that Nandor is not the most self-reflective person in the world,
He
but
tries though.
yeah, he tries. And I think he's got to realize this, that if he had been a little bit more open or at least had more serious conversations, because I think he just blew Guillermo off and was just sort of like, okay, this isn't really that important. When it happened, it'll happen.
Here's my tinfoil hat of
Okay.
really what Nandor was afraid of, that if he turned Guillermo, that Guillermo would leave. And I think for Nandor, his whole story arc has been one of loneliness, that he's been looking for a wife, looking for a companion, looking for friends, looking for what Laszlo and Nadja have, something that for himself. It doesn't have to necessarily be romantic, but somebody
Yeah.
who's a real friend to him, really dedicated to him, truly cares about him. And we saw in the last episode that Nandor knows that that is how Guillermo feels about him when, Guillermo was repeating his card that he gave him about, my dream is to be a vampire, but it's my honor to be your familiar. And we saw Nandor mouthing the words like word for word, like he had read this card a million times, and how important that relationship is, of why he knew at some point he was probably going to have to turn Guillermo, but he was just putting it off because I think he was just afraid he was going to lose somebody else.
And at the very least, he might lose just the dynamic that they had, or how Guillermo helps to look after him. Like, Nandor
Mm-hmm.
is not the most self sufficient vampire in the world. I feel like that is a safe thing to say through 5 seasons. And,
Mm-hmm.
is Guillermo still going to do these things for him? And I'm not saying that Nandor is just being like super selfish and inconsiderate. It's just this is who he is. He's somebody who struggles to take care of himself, and Guillermo helps him emotionally with stuff around the house. And the dynamic could change because when you become a vampire, at least through every vampire related entertainment that we have seen, and I feel like we have seen a lot, every single person is always a little bit different after they get those fangs.
Now, here's one thing that I was kind of surprised by a little bit, where, Laszlo had kind of mentioned that Guillermo hadn't changed all the way, that he was kind of like a half human, half vampire. No reaction from Nandor, where I was expecting to be like, how do you know that? Like, why do you know that? I was really expecting something more from that.
Yeah, it would have been nice if we had a little bit of something more from that. And I think a part of the bad thing about this show only having 10 episodes, and also some of them being so short, is that the resolution of certain things can at times feel a little bit abrupt.
Yeah, for sure. But we did finally get an answer on why Guillermo is not being able to change all the way.
Yeah.
And it's the Van Helsing blood, which is what I mean, a lot of us had thought that it was going to be that, Van Helsing was a human, but over time, being a vampire hunter, that, the bloodline started to develop like an immunity to vampires, and that it was able to fight off some of this vampirism. And that was what was happening to him, that his bloodline was fighting, actually becoming a vampire.
I'll say this. I liked a lot of the episode. I didn't really want this to be the thing. And I think the reason why is, to me, it would have been a much funnier storyline if it was just that Derek is just, he did not follow a proper procedure. And it's just a situation where, he sucks, insert obvious vampire pun here. And ultimately, he just put Guillermo in a bad position. And because of that, they have to try to find a way to undo it. To me, that just felt like a more fun angle. But that may be, once again, so I think my second time saying this season, I don't care about Van Helsing at all. Like, I understand Van Helsing's place in vampire
Mhm.
lore. I am watching a show about vampires. I am not watching a show about Van Helsing. There, I've said it.
Yeah, I was hoping that it would not be the obvious choice. We had brought up some other theories like that Derek is just such a fledgling vampire. He didn't know what he was doing and he
Yeah,
mucked it up, and this is what happened. Or because there was this agreement and bond between Nandor and Guillermo as master and familiar, that once you make that oath to each other, that if you go outside of it, there are consequences, and because you're bonded in a special way, that would have been consequences. But I think we all expected it was going to be the Van Helsing blood.
yeah, it's the predictable outcome, just like it's the predictable outcome here at the end when the vampires finally end up being free because of going to use the documentary crew by the end. Like, this was pretty ingenious on the part of the vampires that, they remembered that they had this conversation, which was taken incredibly out of context, and they were able to use this to get out of this predicament. But once they were, like, of course, Guillermo has to take off somewhere. Nandor is just like full of rage and wants revenge and all this sort of stuff at this point.
It's also really interesting that having Nandor have that reaction where he's just like, he's full of rage. I'm going to kill you. There's no getting out of this. Like, you've humiliated me. We had something kind of thing and you gave it to Derek, like, not me. Like, how could you do this to me? That we saw Guillermo actually turn into a full bat, that he actually was able to do it. And we've seen a little bit of that when we saw Laszlo kind of push him over the balcony a little bit,
Yeah.
and he was like, "Oh, I'm floating," kind of thing. That Laszlo's kind of like, that's how we all learn. You got to jump into it because you're in that situation, and it forces you to really push yourself more into being a vampire.
Well, when you have Nandor the Relentless after you, you better figure out a way to counter his relentlessness.
Yeah, and going back to the documentary crew thing, I thought it was pretty ingenious that Laszlo had brought that up to show the guy that she does matter, even though
Yeah.
they were just trying to get Colin to be with the guide so that they would both leave. I think it's pretty funny, but at the same time, I think that Colin has cemented himself in this group. Like, it's not the same that it was 5 seasons ago,
No.
where he was really, every time he showed up in a room, they would all want to leave or get away. Like, we saw Laszlo help him as the baby Colin Robinson.
Yeah.
Like, we've seen this season, Nandor and Colin get very close with their adventures with John Slattery.
I I I think he's a much more normal part of this. He's not the same sort of vampire, but that's okay. They've come to accept them. He's relying on them, vice versa. It's a
Yes.
really good relationship to sort of see continue forward. And I will say the thing with the documentary crew just reminds me of how passive this crew is most of the time, because we have seen these vampires in really terrible predicaments, such as everything with the Baron. And they just like, we're just not doing anything. We're just gonna sit here and watch all this happen.
Listen, I mean, that's what documentary crews do. We're also covering Only Murders at the Building
Yeah.
here. And there was like a big reveal there with the documentary guy who was just like, yeah, I watched this baby elephant, going into the mud and I didn't help it. It's part of being part of the documentary crew. You're supposed to document everything, good, bad, vampire.
I would have run. I would have left this documentary crew a long time ago. I'm just saying, I'm not down for what these people are doing in the shadows.
Yeah, it's tough.
All right, we will be back very, very soon with our take on the season 5 finale. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any other updates. Thank you guys so much in our quest for 65,000, and thank you to our patrons for your support. We'll see you here next time.